Hey everybody, here's a little video about port texture and how you move through various stages of first kind of, we'll call it roughing in. A lot of porters will use the terms rough cut, medium cut, and basically what that means is that they are just doing the basic shapes or sizing with the heavier cut burrs, not, and I will have to stress this highly, not attempting to get the final shape or the final texture or the final sizing with the heavier cut burrs. I will guarantee you, if you try to take too much material out with a heavier cut, like I'd say a rough cut or medium cut burr, specifically high-speed burrs, you're going to end up with gouges and dips and valleys and ridges and ripples in your porting attempt that you won't be able to get out. Or worse than that, you could put dips and gouges in there, and then you'll try your best to get it to smooth out so that you have a good looking port and a good smooth flow, and you'll poke a hole. You know what I mean? That is common. I mean, that happens to a lot of people. That's why I always say go slow, only do a little bit at a time, and don't try to get anywhere near your final port shape, texture, any of that stuff while you're using the more aggressive, we'll call it, burrs. I've seen people, actually from the racetrack, they'll, I'm not going to tell anybody not to do this, because this would be at least a good learning experience, a way to start out trying to port a head. I've heard people try to port cylinder heads with nothing but sanding rolls. You can do that. I mean, you can eventually clean up a port with only sanding rolls. I mean, it may take you several boxes of them, and it might take you 5 times as long. But eventually, if you take your time and keep everything moving and don't put any weird ripples, ridges, and gouges, or, you know, what I'd call trenches or troughs in the port or in the material that you're working on, eventually, even a sanding roll will remove enough material to make it better. So, but I just want everybody to see the difference. This head right here on the right, I tried to bounce some light through this one. I'm actually in the middle of, on this head, working my sanding rolls to get it to a smooth enough texture on the exhaust ports to run my Scotch-Brite, which other people call cross buffs, in the port to get a shinier texture. And that's basically just like I've said previously. Hopefully this won't be new information, but just so you can kind of hold down carbon buildup in the exhaust port. That's really the only true benefit to mirror polishing a port, is just for carbon control. That's, you know, and then again, we've talked about this before, maybe this is the first video you've seen on cylinder head porting. Your exhaust ports you can make as shiny as you want. You know, mirror polish that thing, brush your teeth in it, comb your hair, whatever. But your intake port doesn't benefit from being mirror polished. Now, I know this comes as a surprise. Most people want, or historically, traditionally, your intake port should be around 60 grit. 60 to 80 grit. Okay, the theory behind that is supported by what they call puddling, where for some reason they're saying the super shiny surface texture of the port can cause puddling of fuel, a loss of atomization through the port that can cause puddling. Okay, I don't know that I've ever experienced a cylinder head that absolutely, ran horribly or didn't perform because the impact port was too shiny. I just know that if you follow the general theory of porting and the way I was taught how to do it, you're supposed to leave your intake port at least with a little bit of texture. I've mentioned before that even a double cut burr finish, or some people like to use sanding stones, and sanding stones leaves a fairly rough finish on them most of the time. That even that rough finish of a double cut burr would be a very acceptable final finish for an intake port, but people don't really like that look. I'm gonna see if I can move you guys over just a hair. This tripod doesn't move as smoothly as I would hope, but this head behind here, I haven't done sanding roll work on it yet. It's still in the double cut burr finish. I want to put it in the light. Okay, now check this out. See there? That is a smoother, that is way smoother than as cast, as delivered from the foundry cylinder head. Okay? You could easily run this head. I mean, both, see if I can get this to tilt down without making anybody sick. But the intake and exhaust are both at what I call, or what is my finish, or my port before I start sanding roll work, is it called a double cut burr finish. You could run this head. You could absolutely run this cylinder head and it would run perfect. Okay? I would argue that if I put this cylinder head on one side of the engine and this other cylinder head on the other side that's been sanding, this has sanding roll, this one does not, you're not going to know the difference. I would argue you're not going to have any power differences, temperature differences, exhaust gas temperature differences, nothing. But for the sake of finishing a job right, I just basically have to finish the port out with the sanding rolls so that the customer is happier and the flow could be enhanced by 1 to 2 CFM or whatever, But I just wanted you guys to see, and I've mentioned this several times in the past, just look at let's see if I can back up just a hair here without killing anybody with my tripod. But I mean, hopefully I can get in on this intake port, because that is a double cut burr finish. It's got a little dirt and stuff in there in that one port, because like I said, I haven't hit it with any kind of sanding rolls. That is just trying to clean off the foundry or the casting texture of the inside of that port, and try to knock down all those lines, what a lot of people call them casting lines, or defects, or little pieces of aluminum that kind of glob in the ports, whatever you want to call it. But I mean, that's a pretty smooth texture to the port. But it'll be way better, because generally what I do, especially today, because I'm having to use the Harbor Freight sanding rolls, because the good rolls I thought I had more, ran out in the middle of this cylinder head procedure. So I had to run to the old Harbor Freight, whip out my 20% off coupon, and buy, and I really don't recommend these, but abrasive sanding cartridges. These things literally, I hate to talk bad about them, but truthfully, the quality is not good with the Harbor Freight cartridge rolls. But when you can buy, that many of them for what, $20, it's good in a pinch, or it's absolutely good for a first timer or someone who's just getting started working on the metals, whether it be intakes, heads. People, a lot of people forget you can actually clean up and polish ventures and carburetors. There's a lot of different applications, but the Harbor Freight cartridges, they fall apart. They come unrolled. They don't come in a true 80 grit, even though they say this kit contains 80 grit, 100 and 120 grit. I would argue that there is legitimately some 120 grit sanding rolls or abrasive cartridges, but even the 80 grits aren't a true 80 grit, and the 80 grit only stays that way for the first few seconds that you're working the port. You know, as soon as you really start getting some action out of it, it starts smoothing out. So you basically end up with a whole bunch of little sanding cartridges that are finer than you want it to be for the intake side. So generally what I'll do is I'll just ignore that fact that my cartridge is not the 60 to 80 grit that I need for a final texture. I will smooth everything the way I want it, and then generally I will come back through the intake ports with a 60 grit flapper wheel. That's something I haven't really shown you guys, and you might need to research that online or something. But a flapper wheel is an excellent way to change the texture of an aluminum port very quickly right when you finish a job. You know what I'm saying? I mean, basically it's not going to remove any metal. Like, all your shaping, smoothing, blending, contouring needs to be done before you do a flapper wheel application. So when I get done with these and everything's measured out the way I want it, when I get the shapes I want, and I don't, go back through it and go, oh crap, how did I miss that? Let me touch that up. When I get everything to the point where it's finished, then I'll run through all these intake ports with a 60 grit flapper wheel set up, and I will definitely run my cross buff / Scotch-Brite balls through the exhaust ports to get them all shined up and make them as smooth as possible. Now, I will not sit there and polish those things to a mirror. I will get those to a very shiny state and send them out the door. So, that's just overkill, anything beyond that. But I want the customer to see the 60 grit finish on the intake, super shiny exhaust, everything looks, legit, and they can bolt these things on and go have some fun with them. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of retouch texturing, final texture for your porting endeavors. I know that this customer's really excited to try to get the heads back. I don't think he's even built the engine yet, but he's like everybody else. They want to get their parts back to their house so they know what's going on and knows they're safe. So these since these things started out at 203cc intake runners, I'm fully expecting these things to probably final cc, I'd say at least 205 to 207. They are going to be overkill for the mild 400 small block this person's building to put in a cruiser, basically a car that him and his wife can go sightseeing around the nation, cruising in their Corvette with this 400 small block. So that'll be interesting. I want to see, if he puts enough compression in it to even take advantage of a cylinder head of this caliber. But everybody builds their own cars the way they want to. So anyway, appreciate you guys watching my videos. I know this wasn't all that visually stimulating. Let me back up here a little bit. But when you start looking at these cylinder heads and the amount of work that goes into finishing them up properly, it's just amazing the kind of airflow just a solid piece of aluminum can provide. So again, thanks again for watching these videos. If I'm a little sketchy on my audio, it's because I'm constantly trying to keep the dog away from the stupid tripod. So thank you, Dookie. You're another member of the broadcast crew. Keep watching, guys. Thanks again.